So New Zealand Landcare Trust is a non-profit, non-government organisation working to support landowners, landcare groups, catchment groups with environmental outcomes, mainly around freshwater, but also biodiversity. So I've got a really neat role where I can sort of try and fit the needs of whatever the group requires at the time. Lots of networking and connecting people with information they need. So since coming to the region, I started this role 1 year ago, and I found that pest plants is a really common issue throughout the whole region with every group I talk to. So I thought that that would be a neat session for us to hold this year. So pest plants continue to be, as I said, one of the biggest issues faced by our region. Our native and in order to restore our native biodiversity, we really need to have a better handle on things. From your registration forms, I can see that there's a broad range of challenges faced by different groups, ranging from wilding pines and vines like old man's beard and banana passion fruit, right down to the ground covering plants like Tradescantia and blackberry, and even pastoral pests like field horsetail and pink ragwort starting to invade native spaces. Today we have an opportunity to hear about how landcare groups in the regions are dealing with their pest plant incursions, discover new research into control methods by Massey University scientists, and you'll have a chance to network with other groups along the way. We'll have 3 breakout sessions during the event for you to talk to a smaller group. So happy for you to have your cameras on throughout the talk, and just keep yourselves muted until the panel, until the breakout rooms, which will happen soon. So I really hope everyone will get something out of the day, and I would like to introduce our panel of speakers. They've put heaps of effort into planning to be here for this event, so thank you very much to our panelists today. First of all, we have Associate Professor Kerry Harrington from Massey University. He's been conducting research into weed biology and control since the early 1980s. And today he'll highlight some of the research conducted by students that he has supervised during that time, including techniques on controlling weeds on new native restoration sites. So Kerry, just want to say a quick hello.
Yep, hello. Yeah, so hopefully you'll get something out of my talk later on. I'm one of the last ones up, but hopefully some of you will still be around by then to listen to what I've got to say.
Yes, definitely worth hanging around for. We have also Brenda Jarvis Lowry, who is one of Dr. Kerry's students. She's in her last year as a PhD candidate at Massey University, and for the last 3 years she's been conducting research into the aspects of the biology and ecology and control of old man's beard in New Zealand. So she's just finishing up and writing her results up now, so you'll be hearing some of the first people to hear about the outcomes from that research. If you want to say hello quickly, Brenda.
Hi everybody, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Then we have Bessie Nichols. She's a trustee at Awahuri Forest Kitchener Park near Fielding. Bessie has a deep love for the park, which is the last remnant of lowland semi-swamp podocarp forest in the Fielding and even Manawatu area. The forest survival was threatened due to its small size, pretty common flooding and alterations to stream flow paths upstream, urban stormwater, and also a waterborne invasion of the pest plant Phragmites kaka, which is one of our key topics we'll be talking about today. Say hi, Bessie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being around today to hear about our plague. Thank you.
We have Julie Ireland, who's the project manager for Old Man's Beard Control with the Rangitikei River Catchment Collective. Julie has extensive experience as a business and policy analyst, as well as a project manager. She's enthusiastic about supporting the efforts of farmers and others to enhance biodiversity and water quality in New Zealand. and she's sitting next to Neil Gallagher. He's the project manager for Rangatake Environment Group. So Julie and Neil work very closely together on old man's bed control. Neil works for the Rangatake Environment Group, and it's an incorporated society operating as a social enterprise. So that might be of interest to some of the environment groups in the room today. They now have a turnover of more than 600,000 a year and growing. And that's Neil oversees a range of activities around old man's bed control, but also riparian planting and native restoration projects around the area. Say hi, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We also have Kelsey Hogard, who's the Biodiversity Officer for Horizons Regional Council. She'll be outlining the council strategies around pest plant control.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being here. I will, at the end of the session, discuss some resources that are available, as well as running you through a pest plant management template that I wrote up that might be of use for writing a management plan for your site that's focused on pest plants, not just revegetation. We also have on the line Dean Berry, who's a North Island team leader for New Zealand Landcare Trust, and monitoring the chat, monitoring everything today is Mario Torres, which is our IT support person. So if you have any issues throughout the day, please see if you can do a direct message to him via the chat and he can help you out. So we've got a huge range of organisations and people attending today. There's more than 60 people registered, so I think there's a few more still coming in. So there's volunteers from 15 different environment groups. We've got catchment group members, iwi representatives, sheep and beef farmers, lifestyle block owners, and dairy farmers. So you can see such a broad issue, but there's so many people out there really keen to do better and with our pest plant issues and try and find solutions. We also have weed control contractors and agency staff. So we've got people here from Fonterra, Horizons Regional Council, Horowhenua District Council, Department of Conservation, MPI, and even Taranaki Regional Council, as well as Forest and Bird. Thank you for coming, Brenda.
Hi, happy to be here, everyone. As Tanya has said, I have been studying the biology and control of old man's beard, and my presentation today just briefly summarizes the key practical outcomes of my research. So first of all, I just want to point out that a lot has been made of the vast numbers of old man's beard seeds that are produced every year and their potential threat. But seeds are just one tool in old man's beard's toolbox for success. A much less visible tool is the complex network of lateral stems or creeping stems that it develops in litter above the ground or within 30 to 40 centimeters below ground. Anyway, so I have surveyed 1 square meter plots in infested areas, riparian areas, and found an average of 20 meters of stems and plus 40 meters of new growth on those stems per plot. So lateral stems may be more important than seeds as far as the population maintenance of old man's beard. So if you focus on only the climbers that you see, you'll almost certainly get regrowth from this complex network. One feature of the old man's beard stems, whether creeping or climbing, is that they can regenerate after injury. Mechanical clearing of land, such as by bulldozing, can worsen an infestation because each fragmented piece of stem can become an independent plant. Also, if floods wash those fragments downstream, they could establish as new plants in a new area. You can see here the vigorous regrowth on fragments that I cut last spring, about half of them regenerated really well. It's well known that old man's beard seeds are wind dispersed, but they can also tolerate up to 6 weeks of water immersion. And if transferred to soil within that time frame, the seedlings do quite well. So it's conceivable that the seeds could also be water dispersed, especially during floods. And therefore, it's important to control old man's beard in riparian zones to prevent it getting into waterways. I do have some good news. Only a small fraction of the thousands of seeds that old man's beard produces and reach the ground remain in the seed bank past 2 years. Most of them will germinate or die within that window of time. You can see in the picture on the right, seeds that were buried and dug up in the spring of the second year, and they were in the process of germinating en masse at that time. Another point of good news is that young seedlings can't compete with dense grass. They just won't survive in that kind of environment. So maintaining a vigorous ground cover can prevent colonization by seed. In these plots, the only seedlings that survived 1 year were those that were weeded regularly and had no competition in the beginning. The bad news is that if old man's beard is already established before the grass gets thick, those lateral stems will not be deterred by the grass. And also, if stems are deposited by floods into grassy areas, those are unlikely to be deterred. So on to chemical control. Cutting and pasting individual stems with picloram has been proven to be quite effective, but because it can leak out of treated plant roots and harm nearby desirable species. Oh, I don't know why it's jumping around. Picloram is a little bit less desirable. So a somewhat less harmful and also highly effective method is to chemically ring bark with triclopiran oil, such as with X-tree basil. This is called the basil bark method, and it involves applying a low pressure spray around the entire circumference of the stem, covering at least 2 times as much stem in height as the stem is thick. This is about 90% effective. Glyphosate is less harmful than either triclopyr or picloram. And cutting and pasting with Glymax gel, which is 45% glyphosate, is about 65% effective. You need to treat both surfaces of the cut when doing this cutting and pasting. One other advantage to using glyphosate is that it can be used near water, which is not true of picloram or triclopyr. All of these methods are very time consuming because you have to treat each individual stem. So they're best used in places where old man's beard is in low to moderate density, or if you have lots of time or lots of hands to do the work. It is easy to miss some stems during treatment. So even when treated stems are killed, the lateral stem network can allow for a really quick recolonization of the same tree hosts. These pictures show clearly why it's important to treat both creeping and climbing stems. You can see from left to right how quickly the stems compensate after some are killed. So within 2 years, it's almost as bad as it was before treatment. In areas like riparian zones and other grassy waste areas with sprawling old man's beard, one effective control is to spray herbicides that don't kill the grass. So like Grazon, Tordon Brush Killer XT, or Metsulfuron. These will control old man's beard, but the grass remains and prevents new infestations by seed. It's important to remember that all of these herbicides are harmful to any broadleaf species, including natives, and so those would need to be shielded when spraying. And when you are making a herbicide choice, you have to weigh the pros and cons. So for example, Metsulfuron is very cheap, but damages some grasses, and which could make it easier for weeds to colonize or recolonize a treated area. Tordon Brush Killer XT is easier on the grass, and it's the most consistently effective of the 3 herbicides that I tested. It's also effective on many other environmental weeds, but on the other hand, it's the most expensive of the 3. And also, one active ingredient is picloram, which, as I mentioned before, is problematic. So that's all I have to share today. I just want to give you a quick summary of the main points of my talk. Basically, the less visible creeping stems are silent villains and need to be factored into control. Fragmented stems can regenerate easily and produce new independent plants. It's very likely that both seeds and stems could be dispersed by flooding events. Seeds are not long-lived, and seedlings are not very competitive. A very effective targeted technique for killing individual woody stems is the basal bark method using X-tree basil. And the most consistently effective herbicide to spray over old man's beard that won't kill the grass is Tordon Brush Killer XT. Thank you. I look forward to answering any questions during the panel discussion, and also I'm interested in hearing about your own experiences controlling old man's beard.
Great. So thank you so much again, Brenda. We're going to now introduce our second lot of speakers. We have Julie Ireland from Rangitikei River Catchment Collective and Neil Gallagher from Rangitikei Environment Group. They're both working with their organisations on the control of old man's beard within the Rangitikei area. So take it away, guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. I'm Julie Ireland, obviously. I work for the Rangitikei Rivers Catchment Collective. It's a farmer-led group that was established in 2017 to help rural communities collect evidence about what's happening in their catchments and to help them plan the future well-being of their catchment. We currently have around 20 and growing catchment groups within the Rangitikei, Turikina and Whangahu Rivers catchments areas that are working to achieve environmental, social and economic goals. The RRCC provides a platform and communication pathway to decision makers and funders to support the vision and goals of the catchment groups. The RRCC attained $1.5 million to spend by 2023 for environmental restoration projects. And this money comes from the Jobs for Nature Fund and is used to employ people to help with the removal of old man's beard. The RRCC has contracted the Rangitikei Environment Group, which Neil works for, to do the groundwork on private properties in the Horizons containment area. Where the old man's beard's inaccessible by ground, we have contracted aerial services to do the control work. We undertook control work on about 900 hectares over the last year, mostly in the Rangitikei and Whangahu areas. So Neil's going to tell you about the work that he's doing.
So I just want to give a little bit of a background about where REG came from. So back in 2001, the Rangitikei Environment Group came to being. This was a time when there was a lot of old man's beard control being done everywhere across the Rangitikei. And the slide shows Horizons containment, the small grey shaded areas were excluded from control, and the rest, so these areas were not funded to do the work. So when a group such as Reg came along at that time, who decided to tackle Old Man's Beard apart from Horizons, they would have been seen as worthy by the Horizons powers that were at the time, and hence Reg was formed and funded, and we have been here since. So the group then is now a passionate, committed, dedicated to the cause, unperturbed in the face of criticism. So our main objectives were and still are to coordinate, plan, initiate work to control Old Man's Beard in the Rangitikei region and undertake projects that improve the Indigenous environment within the Rangitikei. But one of their biggest problems over the years was a lack of effective reporting back to their funders. So when I came along in April 2021, so I've only been here a year, I wrote their last year's report, even though I wasn't there, based on staff diaries and comments, and I was extremely surprised at how much they'd achieved. So what changed in April last year is what happened is we're now gone to an all-round year operation from a 6-month summer period, and we're funded appropriately to do so, and we report religiously. So this is the way Reg funding is split. So the top part, RRCC, we get 60% of our funding. Wind subsidies provide 17%, Horizons 12%, Rangitikei District Council 5%, Department of Conservation 1%, and Restoration Projects 1%. Oops, not even there. This is our structure. So we have chairman, administrator, project manager, team leaders, crew members, and a committee, usually 6 people from the community. So what does it take to be successful at controlling weeds? Well, the answer is all of those things that Rangitikei District, Rangitikei Environment Group been famous for since 2001. Passionate, unperturbed, persistent, unfailing in the name of a cause, and funded to do this work. So if you're an environmental group or an individual about to embark or gone some ways on the journey, what things might you do to make or ensure your project is a success in the face of weeds, present or potential? First thing is make a plan. Apply for funding. Consider health and safety. Communicate your project and monitor progress. But one of the most important things I think you can do is push the go button. Just make a start, and you'll soon realise what's required. So broadly, your project usually occurs in 2 different ways. You'll either have a riparian, a revegetation, or you'll be working in a bush site or wetland. If we start off with a riparian strip along a stream edge or a lake or some water body or an enhancement project, so the area is fenced and the livestock removed, and it's those livestock are the things that maintain the site and grass. Do what you need to do to get an upper hand on weeds. Give your planted desirable species the best chance to thrive. Have some forethoughts. Consider weeds. What's likely to invade? Think about what's growing in the vicinity. Is it blackberry, Old Man's Beard, pampas, willows, whatever it is? Add a fertiliser pellet to your plant. Mulch your plants. Select a bigger grade. Control your predators, those things that'll eat your plants when you put them in. Rabbits, hares, deer. Keep livestock out. Spray them with tree pal or plant skid. Give plants, those desirable plants, some shelter. Plant them closer together. Consider the climate. Choose a species adapted to your situation. Look around for species growing in the vicinity for some ideas about what best to grow here. Select faster growing species. Interplant those ones amongst your desirables to give like short-lived species such as tree lucerne. Anything to give your selected planted species that competitive edge on weeds that will try to establish. and be prepared, or at least think about anything you might need to control that you can work on as soon as it appears. So if we move to native bush or wetland, what do we do about weeds here? We want to start a project. First thing we need to do is find out what species we have in that area. So we need to do a weed or a plant survey. It's our first step. If you don't feel comfortable with someone who is, botanist clubs are always very receptive to creating a plant list. But it's also what weeds you have and where are they and what's the extent of them. And also with those individual species, what risk do they pose to your site? For example, if it's old man's beard, then it poses a huge risk. But if it's, for example, Jerusalem cherry, not so much, or a different, less urgent approach might be required. And when you're working on a project, celebrate success. We now, Rangitikei Environment Group has social media accounts, and it's proving to be extremely successful.
So Bessie has a deep love for our Awahuru Forest Kitchener Park. It's a Crown Reserve on the Fielding town boundary. It's significant as the last remnant of lowland semi-swamp podocarp forest in the Manawatu district, with a diversity of unique flora and fauna species. This forest survival is threatened due to its small size, atypical flooding and straightening of streams upstream, urban stormwater, pest plants being weeded from people's backyards and fielding and thrown onto the stop banks behind their houses. Basically, the forest ends up as a catch-all for all the weeds from potatoes through to Tradescantia and other things coming down the stream. But the biggest issue has been an invasion of Phragmites kaka.
Phragmites kaka. I'm just really going to quickly run through what we've learnt over the last 18 months of having to deal with it. It's made up of several parts. The most dominant and what you see is the reed. It's the visible part, but it's only about 25% of the plant. It has sectional growths on it, and these sectional growths, if broken and put in water, are viable. So it can populate from that perspective. And this is a sample of the density of reeds that just create monocultures. We've now got onto the other part that goes underground. This is the rhizomes. They are huge reservoirs. They create very dense half-metre mats under the ground and can hold water for over 4 months and still produce even after they've been sitting in the sun for months at a time. So they're actually quite a problem, and this is where most of your vegetative propagation is coming from. There's another component here called the stolon, which sometimes is coming from underground and then following up from the root system. Other times we're actually seeing the leaves, when they flow onto the ground, they become stolon, and they can also become active and create new plants. They can travel, like the rhizome, 6 to 8 metres underground in a season. Now, flowers, we didn't think they flowered in this region. We thought that they flowered, we know they flowered up in the Auckland region, but last Friday, we have now encountered flowering in this area. We've identified 2 flower heads about 1.5 kilometres apart from each other. We've sent those down to Landcare Arboretum to have a final verification on these compared with its sister plant Australis. Some of the observed ecosystems across the Manawatu, things like sand dunes, they can, once they're established with moisture, they actually have the ability to survive in dry areas as well. The centre one is the most important one, the photo. That is an 8 to 9 metre tree that is completely surrounded by Phragmites, both with the reeds cutting out the light and huge, dense rhizomes around the bottom of it. It's choking that tree. It's killing it, basically. We see it in oxbows. We've seen it in landside of stop banks, stream sides of streams. We get monocultures, and it's also on the roadsides. The question is, how is this plant being distributed and spread across the region when it doesn't flower? So we've got no seeding issues here. It's not being carried by animals or anything like that. Primarily between the waterways, it can only be by human activity, machinery, metal boats. We have to look at some of our hygiene around this. Once it's in a waterway, well, I'm sorry, it's nature takes its course, very much like old man's beard. It gets, small pieces get broken off from those rhizomes and reeds, and they go downstream. And I'd also like to point out here that they don't just survive in fresh water. Unfortunately, they survive in salt water as well, and are hitting our estuaries and beaches. This is an example of how they get carried from a monoculture on the side of a stream. This was gouged out last winter in the floods and the high waters, and you can see pieces of rhizome and reeds there. The next floods and high waters, more pieces will be carried off downstream. The spread across the Manawatu that we know of at the moment is right through the lower reaches of the Whangaehu River for 3 k's, the Rangatiki for 7, the Tangi estuary, the Makino stream from Fielding down through the Orua River, as far as we believe to Rangiaotu. It's on the roadsides in several places through the Manawatu. Horowhenua has multiple sites, Kapiti's 2 that we know of. Unfortunately, we are now getting reports back to us since the September and December floods last year. We're getting now over 30 sites identified on the beaches themselves between Tangimoana and Foxton. There's an anomaly around this plant that people need to be aware of. Phragmites australis is its sister plant. It is listed as a total eradication plant in New Zealand. Phragmites kaka is only listed as a weed in the Auckland area, and it's not even listed through other weed lists as being present or even really existing. One of the things that we did was we decided we needed to understand this plant and have it risk assessed. We couldn't find anything or anybody willing to do that. So we've actually done our own based on the NIWA risk assessment for aquatic weeds. And one of the reasons we did it was we knew that Phragmites australis was on that list. Shortly after we completed our assessment, NIWA had their updating of the assessment, and Phragmites australis, Kaka's sister plant, came out as listed as the worst and the biggest risk to New Zealand aquatic environments. Our recording is we're about 1 or 2 points ahead of australis, because that can live in salt water as well. We compared what genomes that were available between australis and kaka through Wildlab. Unfortunately, there's only 2 of them that were available. These came back as identical, and we cannot differentiate between the 2 species currently, but we can use Wildlab to test waterways. And quite frankly, I think it doesn't really matter whether you're dealing with kaka or australis, they both need to be managed. We've done some management trials. They're fairly crude, but we've got some interesting kind of bits from them. Mechanical management is your best option when you've got 1 or 2 reeds, your very first infestation, dig it out, but get every fragment of that rhizome. Once you get bigger, you've got a major problem with the volume of the rhizomes. They don't burn, they're full of water. Composters, professional composters, when we approached them, were uncomfortable about it and wanted to create and test proper systems of composting like they've created for gorse, because they didn't feel that they could manage it and guarantee no further propagation from it. So really we're down to places like using Bonnie Glen and stuff like that, and the cost issue is just astronomical when you think of how much volume those reeds actually create. There's a question here, is that I think that maybe there is some form of permit control around its disposal needs to be looked at to protect other environments. A second thing that we moved on to is we tried what we call tarping, basically removing oxygen, light and increasing heat to rhizomes. Composting in the ground is really what it was. We did a first trial. It was the wrong time of the year, but we did notice this spring that the growth was slower in that area, the regrowth. So we've now put down some more trials in here. They're still underway over the summer period with a few modifications. There's 2 separate sites that are slightly different in composition under those tarpaulins. We're using the 2 layers of the very heavy, juicy silage plastic. This may be an option in areas along stream banks, stop banks, where we have chemical management issues. Chemical management, we've approached this in 2 ways. The first one is we've actually gone for spraying. Now the spray is one of those situations, don't just do it once or twice a year. We're finding that we have to repeat over and over and over, and we've got to 9 times with the slide on the left, and we're now seeing compromise in that plant, but there is still growth. We're having to continue to work with that. Chemical management with a drip method, we cut reeds off and then we dripped directly into the reed itself to get into the rhizome. This is the outcome. It is our most successful to date. We have got a lot to learn about this, as one of the areas and patches we ended up killing the grass around us, so there is a leaching issue that we encountered. We don't know what that's about, and we're still trying to identify what happened there. There's been many other issues we've investigated, things like electric weeding, what goes on in that sectional node of the rhizome where all the growth is being stimulated from, what's going to happen if we kill off the plants on the sides of stream banks and stop banks where they're completely honeycombing. Are we going to compromise structural integrity of those? Is there a composting process that we can look at? Will freezing the rhizomes kill the cell structures? So there's more questions than answers. My last slide is I wanted to look at a comparison of the management of Kaka versus Old Main Beard right now. One, as you can see, is publicly listed, it's known, it's recognised, it gets funding, there's management processes around it. Kaka, it's not formalised as a weed properly, it's not recognised, there's no New Zealand publications, one unvalidated risk assessment done by us, no knowledge of its spread, no real validated research, no coordinated management approaches. We couldn't get funding when we approached funders because we couldn't verify that it's a listed weed. And there's been no overall listing in its management. Today, I hope we look at this forum as an opportunity to understand the mechanisms that we're using around weed management. There's a lot going in, but it's uncoordinated, and we need coordinated, targeted stuff, because this is a unfortunately, a 17-year case study and a complete failure of our systems. And I think this belongs to everybody, from volunteer groups right through to governments, to legislation, whatever. Thank you. That's my lot.
Right, if you just want to click stop sharing. Thank you, Bessie. I'm blown away with the amount of work that your non-profit volunteer organisation has done around so thoroughly studying this plant with very little support, and I'm hoping that we're going to see that change over the coming year. I have got a copy of the risk assessment that Bessie did for the Phragmites kaka, which will come out with the resources in my email tomorrow. And I'm sure you all have burning questions that make sure you keep track of those for the panel discussion at the end. Thank you, Bessie. So next of all, we're going to introduce Kelsey Hoggard from Horizons Regional Council. I'm just going to spotlight you so you come up. There you go. Kelsey is in the biodiversity team working with pest plants across part of the region. So she's going to talk through what area her team covers and what they can and can't do, basically, to support groups. And that would be great. If you could go away, Kelsey. Thank you for being here.
Hi everyone, just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. So as Tanya said, I work for Horizons Regional Council in the biosecurity team. So I work with pest plants throughout the region. So we have 6 biosecurity officers across the region. And as you can see, we cover the whole thing, so we each have a pretty big patch. I do the Horowhenua and the Lower Rangitikei and Lower Manawatu itself. We currently don't have anybody in Palmerston North or Fielding, but interviews were yesterday, so hopefully soon we'll have that person starting. So today I thought that I'd briefly go over what's called the Regional Pest Management Plan, or RPMP, which is pretty much the rule book that we follow as a biosecurity team. It's a list of species, plants and animals that we have the power to control, basically. This is where all our funding comes through. So all of these species on here, we have a management plan for. So within the RPMP, we have 5 management programs, and I'm going to go over each one individually. And we do work on private land and regional council land. So the places we don't work are Department of Conservation, district and city councils, NZTA and Rail. So all of those organisations are responsible for their own pest management, but we do work in very closely with all of them to make sure that we're all on the same page about the RPMP. So our first program is our exclusion program. Now, these are the plants listed in that big book that aren't in our region, and we want to keep it that way. So while we actively look for the plants, we also do rely on, if people see something they think looks a little bit funny, giving us a ring, taking photos and saying, hey, what do you think this is? We do use iNaturalist as well to track the funny goings on that happens around the community. Now, when plants in the exclusion program turn up, we pretty much drop everything to respond. So as you can see, the plant that's circled in red, Sagittaria, about 18 months ago, the plant actually turned up in Palmerston North. So what that meant, because it was an exclusion species, so it wasn't previously known in our region, we dropped it all, we got the diggers in, we got everything out. And the monitoring process that's gone on since then, we've been checking the site every 3 to 4 weeks because we want to make sure that this plant doesn't establish anywhere else in the region because it hasn't been here before. So our second management program is our eradication program. Now, these are the plants that we want to get rid of completely from the region. It's going to take a long time. We have over 1,500 eradication sites in the region that cover 18 different species, and it's a big job. I mean, we have over 650 sites of woolly nightshade alone just in Wanganui and the Horowhenua. So that keeps us pretty busy. So what the eradication program means is basically if we know about the plant, we come in and cut it down and get rid of it. So the third program is our progressive containment program. Now this one's quite confusing and it's taken me a very long time to get my head around it. So these are the plants that are creating a huge issue and in some places have very dense infestations. And so we're trying to push those infestations back and get levels of plants down to an acceptable level of what we call zero levels, where we don't have plants in specific areas. So Old Man's Beard, I'm sure you all know about that. Banana passion fruit, these are our progressive containment species. There are two zones within progressive containment. So we have firstly our active management zone. So this is the area where we as Horizons are out there working. So we use contractors, either on the ground, helicopters, drones, abseilers, anything we have to use to get rid of those plants, we use it. We as biosecurity officers are on the ground as well, chainsaws, tool belts, hedge trimmers, anything we need to use to get rid of these plants, we do use it. So this is just an example of the Levin area. So these are the progressive containment sites that I'm currently managing. I have over 200 Old Man's Beard sites just in Levin itself. So I'm sure you can all appreciate that it's a pretty big job. We rely quite heavily on historic sites, so sites that we already know exist. And it's really great when people ring us up and let us know about a site that we potentially didn't know about, because we can't be everywhere and we can't see everything. So the second zone for our progressive containment species is our good neighbour zone. So I talked about just before about our active management zone, so where we are working. The good neighbour process zone are areas where the infestations are just so dense that we would be using all our resources and all our time to try and get on top of a plant that we're probably not going to get anywhere with. So we do have rules to try and help landowners. If one landowner is trying to keep their land clear and the direct neighbour isn't, we can enforce rules to make sure that that neighbour actually can keep a clear boundary to try and stop the plants from coming over the boundary onto the clear landowner's piece of land. And the final two control programs we have are sustained control and site-led. Now, sustained control is our possum program, so we don't have any plants in there, but those are the ones that we're just trying to keep on top of the possums. The boys work really hard and cover some serious land to try and get those numbers down. And our site-led pest program, that's targeting areas of significant value. So these sites may be within our good neighbour zone, so where we're not actively working for, say, Old Man's Beard, but the site itself is really important and we're trying to keep that value going within the site. So the moral of the story, because trying to explain the regional pest management plan in 10 minutes is very difficult. It's taken me 2 years and I still have questions. If you think you've got a plant in the regional pest management plan, you've got plants you're having trouble with, you just have questions, give us a ring. There's a free phone number for Horizons, and what the lovely ladies on the front desk do is they put up this little report that you can see on the screen in front of you, and it gets sent through to whoever's area that you're in. We'll give you a ring, we'll have a chat, we'll come up with a plan. If we can help you, we will help you, we want to help you. So give us a ring and we'll see what we can do for you. And just really quickly, Phragmites carcass. So unfortunately, this plant is not listed in our RPMP, but the Horizons River Management team in particular is very interested in this plant just because of the potential destruction it could cause to the integrity of the stock banks. So we did an aerial survey from the Orua River, from Fielding down to the Manawatu River. And I hope you can all see the green dots. They are the sites that we found. So they varied in size, and the circle on the right, basically all of that in there is Phragmites. Now, I had a quick chat to the river management engineer this morning, and it sounds like there's a bit of progress being made in terms of developing a control program along with Bessie, which is really awesome, so that in the future we might actually be able to start sort of looking at getting on top of this kaka. So it's a bit of a watch this space at the moment, and hopefully we can get somewhere with it. So again, give us a ring. We'll see what we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelsey. That's great. I'll just remove the spotlight. Great. Oh, thank you. It's really good to understand better how it's all managed in this region and see how you're front footing it when there's a new incursion coming in. I'm very interested to see whether these flowers that come that have been found on the Whangmairi's kaka show anything up that is new and different. Now we're going to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Kerry Harrington from Massey University. For those of you who missed the introduction at the beginning, he's been conducting research and teaching on weed biology and control since the early 1980s. Kerry's going to highlight some of the research finding from previous Massey students that were under his supervision, including techniques for controlling weeds that interfere with the establishment of native plants. So we'll hand over to you now, Kerry. Thank you so much for being part of this event.
So yes, as Tania said, I was quickly put together a few slides from different bits and pieces of work we've done in the past. So one thing I thought might be suitable to talk about is the work we did with grape bindweed. A lot of you know that as convolvulus. Also done a lot of work with getting selective herbicides for controlling weeds. Just got a builder outside my window. Of course, you'd start the circular saw as soon as I start talking. And so looking at how to get natives established, so looking specifically at Mānuka, because I've done quite a bit of work on that, but just quickly looking at some of the other natives we'll work with. So with the grape bindweed, it's been one of the major issues in riparian plantings. You get your riparian zone all planted up, and then after about 2 or 3 years, bindweed comes in and then grows up over the top of everything, and all you get is solid bindweed. And so we had a look at that. Taranaki Regional Council asked us to do that. So we did both a field trial and a glasshouse trial. So the field trial, we looked at a number of different herbicides.
Get that. Could you try again?
And so Banvine, Tauron Max, which is T-Max, Versatile, and some of those other herbicides there. And what we did, we tried to go for just 90% of the ground cover, because we're trying to see what would happen if we avoided part of the plant, because if you've got natives underneath, we don't want to be spraying everything. So that's the sort of results we got, that the number of shoots that came up in the spring after spraying the trichloroaminopyrrolid pictogram mix, which is Tauron Brush Colour XT, was the most effective, followed by the 2,4-D dicamba, which is often sold as Banvine. The T-Max came in about 3rd place. We also looked at doing this in the glasshouse, looking at putting the herbicide either on the bottom half or the top half of the vine, because the thing to realise here is that the leaves near the base, especially in autumn, are the ones that are sending the sugars down into the rhizomes, and therefore that's where the herbicide that is applied to that leaf will go as well. So we looked at the same sorts of herbicides plus 1 or 2 others. And these are the sorts of results we got 37 weeks after treatment. So once again, that trichloroaminopyrrolid mix came in best, and it worked better when it was applied to the lower part of the plant. So the L is lower part, use the upper part. And then the 2,4-D dicamba mix worked well too, and then T-Max again, though it wasn't quite so clear cut that the lower part was better than the upper part there. But basically, that gave some sort of an idea of what chemicals to use and not to use. So glyphosate, for example, was not effective, and neither was metsulfuron. So though the sorts of chemicals we worked out were best to use, and generally the recommendation we came up with at the end of that is to apply it in autumn, because that's when all the sugars, it's a plant that dies back in autumn and then it's dormant over winter. So you're wanting the herbicide to go back into the rhizomes when it's putting all the sugars down there ready for winter, and then that tends to kill it. There was always some regrowth, and so we recommend having a go at that again in mid-spring rather than waiting all the way through to autumn again. So I've got a web page on that, and so the address is there, but this is going to be sent out to you later, evidently. We've done lots of work trying to work out if you are planting natives, how to keep weeds under control around them. We've done non-chemical things. We've tried mulches. There's stuff called eco cover, which is recycled paper. It works well, but it's expensive. You could use corrugated cardboard instead, but the problem is as soon as it gets wet, if you've got pins holding it down at the side, they rip out. So black weed mat works much better, but the only thing about black weed mat is it never goes away. So you've got plastic there, which is generally you don't want in the environment. So generally, unless you're going to hand pull weeds around natives, we feel that herbicides are the best way to go. We've done a number of trials with herbicides. And so it's just a quick shot there of if you don't control weeds versus if you do control weeds, it just allows the native to get off to a much better start. So as I said, we've done a number of projects, but I'll just focus up on the Manuka one because we've got probably more work done on that. What we do is when we apply these herbicides, we apply it to a known area because a lot of the herbicides, you can only get the rates on a per hectare basis. And so what we have is that little metre squared template that we use there, or we've actually got two templates there. And then we spray the herbicide for a set period of time that we know. With a lot of backpack sprayers, it does deliver herbicide reliably. If you do it for 4 seconds, you get the same amount every 4 seconds. And so we used to time the amount within that template, so you're getting the right rate on. So we had it calibrated to be 1,000 litres per hectare. So for the Manuka work, we looked at some treatments we applied before we actually planted, so glyphosate, and then with glyphosate with some residual herbicides. I'm going to point you to the direction of where we've published this stuff later on. It's all in kilograms per hectare, which is the active ingredient per hectare. To make use of it, you then need to convert that into litres per hectare of product. So for example, 1.8 kilograms per hectare, if you're using glyphosate 360, that's the same as 5 litres per hectare. And then the other treatments we did, we applied after the Manuka was established. I didn't have a photo of the shield with Manuka, so just pretend that flax there is Manuka. So by shielding, what you use is a half bucket like that with the bottom cut out. You put it hard up against the plant, you spray around one half, you move the shield around and spray the other half. And that works very effectively. You can use glyphosate right up to the base of the plant doing that. But we also looked at adding in residual herbicides such as simazine. And then we also looked at using, without a shield, using haloxyphop. So that's a grass killer that can be used over most broadleaf species safely, sold as Galant, for example, and looking at mixing in various residual herbicides with that as well. So the sorts of results we got from that, this is 3 months after we planted the Manuka. So obviously the weed control we did before we planted, the weeds were starting to come back in a lot more there than the ones that we did afterwards. But as you can see there, the glyphosate afterwards with some simazine mixed in kept weeds under control for a longer period of time. Just visually looking at that, so if you got untreated, you can see a little Manuka plant in the middle there. If you used glyphosate only applied beforehand, the weeds were starting to come back in again 3.5 months afterwards. Whereas if you're looking for the treatments we applied after the Manuka had been planted, so we've got different generally it was more weed free, but if you had the residual herbicide mixed in with glyphosate, and even better still, if we had clopyralid mixed in, we're getting it kept weed free for a lot longer after we planted. But shielded glyphosate is probably one of the easiest things to do. With a lot of these other things like the simazine and clopyralid, you need to do the test to make sure that it's not going to be unsafe for the native species. But with glyphosate, you can spray right up to the base if you've got that shield, and it's the sort of thing that anyone can do quite easily. Haloxyfoc, it's a reasonably expensive herbicide, but it's something you can apply over the top of it without needing to use a shield. And so we got pretty good weed control of that as well. We've done other work with a number of other native species, and just give you an example of the sorts of work that we've done there. This was with Koromiko. And so with the red graphs, the red bars there, if it was all the way out to the right, that means the plants were still dead. This was period after planting, and the light blue ones, you want that as far over to the left as possible because the plants are still healthy. So although we got best weed control with the haloxyfoc tubethylazine mix, that was actually fairly damaging to the Koromiko, as opposed to the shielded glyphosate. We did try unshielded glyphosate there and got away with it, but I would never recommend that. It was just lucky that the Koromiko didn't die with that particular one. So that's with haloxyfoc, the grass killer, haloxyfoc plus T-Max. So just finishing off, basically there are viable herbicide options available to help get native species established, but shielded glyphosate works well, but it just lasts for longer if you've got a residual herbicide mixed in. Haloxyfoc is good if you've got mainly grasses there. Clopyralid will take out more of the broadleaf species, or aminopyralid, and that can be safe for a number of natives, but you've got to know which ones. And simazine or tubethylazine, the residual herbicides that be added in, safe for some, but not safe for others. And for example, toy, that's the only way we could do that was just with the shielded glyphosate. I forgot to mention at the top there, if you Google up, for example, Harrington Gregory native plants, you can find this work that's been published, and I've mentioned back to some of the earlier ones how to Google them up. So just final slide, just to let you know that I run a short course each year. It's an online short course on how to use herbicides. It's mainly designed for chemical company reps and regional council staff. So it's not cheap at $1,500 plus GST. But it's the sort of thing that some people who are doing this sort of stuff day in and day out may find useful, because if you get to grips with these herbicides, you can generally do a good job of keeping these weeds under control efficiently. So feel free to contact me if you want to know anything about this work, or also about the short course. Registrations close in May. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kerry. I have a very brief question while you're closing up there. Does your short course also cover weed identification?
No. So that's dealt with by my website. Well, I've got about 75 weeds in there, but most of them are agricultural weeds. So these environmental weeds, I've got a few covered. But no, it's the sort of thing I'd probably need another. So that online course is equivalent to a 3-day full-out course. So I'd need another 3-day full-out course to do identification. You're far better to buy a good identification book. And if anybody wants to know which are the best books, if you email me, I can give you a link to the 2 best books to buy. There's one that focuses mainly on grasses, another one that does all the broadleaf species, which you may already have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kerry. We have time to also have a talk from Angela Bounds from Landcare Research. If I had known Angela before this, would have been sure to introduce her as a speaker, and she's kindly agreed to hop on for 5 minutes and have a chat about biocontrol, and then she'll also be taking part in the panel discussion. So if you're there, Angela, it'd be great if you could.
Yes, thanks, Tanya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Like you.
Thanks very much. I actually have no idea why I was on the distribution list to get invited to this, but I was very happy to receive the invitation. So it's also great to be able to give a short talk on biocontrol. So thank you for that. So I work for Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, and we've got quite a small weed biocontrol team, but we do quite a lot of work for such a small team. So for those of you who don't know about classical biocontrol, we look for natural enemies such as insects or pathogens or mites of a target weed. We look for those in the native range, organisms that have co-evolved or natural enemies that have co-evolved with the target weed species and have evolved to be host specific to their target weed species. And we go through a very rigorous protocol and process to get approval to release biocontrol agents into New Zealand. We do years of research to make sure that they are host specific and not going to attack any crop species or any of our precious native species. And then we apply to the Environmental Protection Authority to get approval to release. So I've been very interested to listen to everyone talk, because we've got biocontrol programs for a lot of the weeds that have been mentioned today: old man's beard, Trader's cantia, field horsetail, banana passion fruit, wild ginger, woolly nightshade, Chilean flame creeper. Those are just some of the weeds that have been mentioned today that we do have weed biocontrol programs, and they're all at different stages. Some projects have just started with new funding that we received from MPI through the SSSS Sustainable Food, Fibre and Futures program. So we've got 6 new weed targets funded through that program, which is awesome, which are in both environmental weeds and productive sector weeds. And then some of them we've got agents released, some of them we've got 1 agent released, and we're still looking at more. So yeah, if any of you are interested in finding a little bit more about biocontrol and the agents that we have available, you can talk to me. I'm a researcher, but also the team's knowledge broker. So I'm the person to come to if you have any questions, and I can direct you to the right person if I don't know the answer. And then also just a little bit about funding. You might be interested to know that most of our applied research, we do get some funding from MB to do some kind of to do sort of fundamental research, but most of our applied research, which is basically testing agents and getting them released into the field in New Zealand to start doing their work to attacking and reducing populations of weeds that we don't want here. Most of that is funded through it's called the National Biocontrol Collective. It's a collective of 14 regional councils and unitary authorities and the Department of Conservation. And we have meetings once a year to talk about progress on the project and priority target weeds, how we prioritize which weed targets to work on and to explore for biocontrol. So I've done quite a bit of work with Craig Davey and Kelsey Hoggard from Horizons, but all of the regional councils are quite active. So also, if you have any questions about biocontrol or interested, if Manawatu is not your or if that's not your region, most of the biosecurity officers and from the regional councils in your region will be able to provide information as well. In some cases, for example, Trader's cantia, we've got 4 biocontrol agents that are pretty well established now, especially in the North Island. Those biosecurity officers might be able to help you find sites where you can collect some of the agents to redistribute them to your infestations or to your forest, wherever you're undertaking work. But the key thing about biocontrol is also it takes a long time. So we need refuges where the stands of the weeds are left alone for a longish period of time, so that the agents can build up good population densities and start to damage the weeds. So I don't know if that kind of covers what people would be interested to hear. But I'm happy to take questions as well, or just move on to the panel discussion and take part in that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've got one more little bit to talk about, and then we'll jump into the panel. I would love to, if you could send me a link to the key place to find information online, and I can share that, that would be great. If you don't mind me sharing your email as well.
No problem at all. Happy to share my email. Just a note on our website, it is a work in progress. We changed our branding a few years ago, and it's been a mammoth task to reorganize the website and update all our resources, but certainly I can, if there's nothing on the website, if you come to me directly, I'll be able to also put you onto the right person or provide additional information if you're struggling to find it on our website, but happy to share that information.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I can understand that. It's a huge amount of resources on your website.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for jumping in on off the cuff like that. Well done. Right, I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you now and just go through the pest plant management template that you'll be receiving via email. Here we go. Right, so you know, New Zealand Landcare Trust has got a lot of resources available on their resources page, and it's constantly building and changing, so it's worth going back and checking what's available at any given time, because you might find something quite useful for your group. So we just tweaked one of our other plans and hoping that it can be useful for groups to set up a pest plant management plan and can be easy enough to follow. So you'll just need to pop in your core information about the site and who's going to be the key contact for the site. I've then got some links here for ways that you can find more information to fill in some of the tables below. For example, on the NZ Landcare Trust website, there's a wet MAC resource, which is set up for how to assess and monitor wetlands for their health and biodiversity. But a lot of the modules will go across any land use type. If you just pick out certain modules, you can use it for riparian planting and lots of other uses. For example, you can learn how to create a Google My Maps to create a free map of your site and add layers in and icons in and different things to showcase your plans for pest plant control or revegetation of a site. How to use photo points, how to conduct a weed survey. So that all that kind of stuff is in the WetMac link. Then we've got Dr. Kerry Harrington's weed database on the Massey University website. Weed Busters is always great. Plant Conservation Network, Doc has a online resource as well, and Horizons Regional Council as well. If there's any key links that are missing, please fire them through in the chat and I can add them in before I send this out tomorrow. So next you might do a brief description of the project and site, providing context to the restoration. The key way that this kind of template would be useful, I hope you can all hear me, sorry, I just realized the paper was over the microphone. A key way that this might be useful is this kind of template is also if you're applying to funders for funding to control weeds or something along those lines, funders will be really impressed with this kind of document and having a plan in place that you can share between your volunteers or your work crew so they understand what the annual work plan is for pest plants. So we're going to describe the area, ownership and zoning, any rules around pest plant management within the site. If it's on a dock reserve, you may not be able to use certain herbicides, or if it's close to water. So just being really aware of the regulations around that. And that's where you can contact your regional council or dock directly to discuss any plans you have for your site. What's the site history? What's your goals and aspirations also for the site? Are you planning to completely remove a weed species? Are you planning to control it to a certain area? That kind of information can go in here. Then a photo of the site, that kind of is it like an overview of, it might not be of weeds, but it might be just a landscape view of the whole site. Here I've just put in an example of a site map that I created for my lifestyle block. And this was created in Google My Maps, and I've got a little link here you can use to go directly to a tutorial on how to create your own map. Excuse the black blocks, I just blocked out the street names. So we have a house site, we have new fencing that went in. Here we've got different layers according to the planned works we're going to do and pest plants that we're going to control. So we've got different colors assigned to different areas, and then we've got numbers for the zones where I'm going to work over different years on planting out in riparian natives. This is directly out of the WetMac modules. It's a weed survey data sheet. So you can go through, and I'll just go straight down to the bottom, and you can discuss whether the species occur sporadically or the number of plants and the area of spread. So it's just some directions at the bottom here on how to fill that out. If you're not able to do a GPS waypoint or coordinates, you could put the photo point number, but ideally, if you can set up, even on your phone, there's some apps that I'll try to find a link actually to some different apps that you might be able to use to put a waypoint on there if you don't have a GPS. Action table. So this is where you would put in your actions and dates, and you might want to group them as a general type, so invasive vines, and then there's brambles, or you might have the actual species name in there. So here I've just put an example of what you would do about old man's beard control, and this has been supplied by Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, for how to target old man's beard and how much the cost might be. You might have to put some fencing in or something, so you can add in the costs in there and what priority it is. And then you see blackberry, we're going to spray it in April each year as the as the leaves are just about to die off and all of the nutrients are starting to come back down the stem of the plant. You want to spray it at that point so that it takes the nutrients down into the plant and hopefully doesn't come back the next year. And privet, you can cut and paste, for example. So I've got some blank templates in there. You can copy and paste the whole thing and add more in. Here's an example of photo points. So this area was sprayed in April 2021, and that's 1 year later, showing that there's not much regrowth happening. So I would still monitor that for another season before going in with the brush cutter and clearing it a little bit so that we can get access and then planting with the natives. Then you can have, this is kind of like a planting plan for your different zones. So you can see zone 3 and 4, the riparian zone next to the stream. You can give an idea of the size. And the really good thing about the Google My Maps is that when you create a polygon, which is just the outline of a shape, and you click on it again, it actually gives you the area of that polygon or zone. So you can input that directly into your plan. Talk about whether or not it's fenced, number of plants, your density of planting. Here I just went with a low density of planting because there's already existing carex and other plants in the area, and I'll just be adding to that with some larger, more diversity. So we've got carexes and sedges growing there, infill planting, that'll happen. I really like that Neil said to make sure you mulch your plants really well. I've started using biochar as well as mulch. We have lots of resources about creating your own biochar. It's really good for holding and retaining nutrients. You can actually soak it in a seaweed mix and then put it into the hole with your plants, and it will take up all the nutrients and hold them and release them slowly. And then it also retains moisture in the hole to help the plant survive if there's a dry period, which we've had this summer. It's been shocking. So just some ideas there of what you might want to write, and then some blank forms for you to fill in for your different zones, and then a work plan timeline. So you can pop in there using some of the resources above, like Weed Busters and other places. Kerry Harrington's list of pest plants is quite good because he goes into good detail about which spray or which method you might want to use for control, and even some of the time frames and best times to do things. So that's just an example there, and then a blank one for you to fill in. If anyone has anything else they would like to add to this document, feel free to do that and get in touch with me. Otherwise, we'll send that out tomorrow, along with a big list of other links and places you can find out more information. I'm just going to stop sharing now. Right, where are we? So I think what we'll do is we'll move into our panel discussion. So I know that we had a few questions that popped up in the chat near the beginning and partway through. So what I might do is just, Mario, can you pin all of the panelists, including Angela Bounds, for me so that they're all up on the screen, please? So I will just scroll back through. I know that Mavis had a question near the beginning. Mavis Mullins, okay. She said, Brenda, do any of the chemical solutions have any caveats through the EPA HSNO committee, or are they under investigation or review? Brenda?
Yeah, so if you didn't see my answer, all of those chemicals that I used are currently being used by DOC or by regional councils. They're all approved by EPA and can be used now.
Awesome. Thank you. Nadine, I'm sorry, there's so many questions. Other comments too. So in terms of resources, we had a few comments around education for rural landowners, also around the threat to our biodiversity by pest plants. We could focus on pest animal species as being a threat to our native fauna, but weeds like old man's beard will cut off food supply and habitat for our manu or birds. I think just some education around pest plant identification. Yeah, so that's coming up multiple times, is that having a pest plant hui that's more around pest plant identification, that we could maybe get some different like a field day going or something for people in the land use space, which might be quite a good outcome from this meeting for me to organise for next year, if everyone likes the sound of that. Nadine, are you there? I'm just wondering if there were any more questions that I missed. I did see one and I can't find it now.
There was a question around Phragmites carca and the anomaly, and why has this not been looked at for its impact on native forests, not just stock banks?
That one might be, I think that one was directed at Kelsey.
Yeah.
Kelsey, did you hear that? Just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's good as gold. So the gist of it, obviously from the presentation, you probably understand that all of our funding comes from the RPMP. So if plants aren't in the RPMP, currently we're very limited on what resources we can apply to a plant outside that plan. So I think the progress being made in terms of river management getting involved is really positive, and it's a really good start. But it's just that it's the lack of resources. But I think as things progress, so when I was outlining those programs that we have, I would say that the Phragmites carca is more coming into that site-led program. So we've really got to look at what we're trying to protect. And when there's areas of interest that are really valuable, it'll be about targeting those areas themselves instead of, the whole infestation in the entire region. Because talking to Bessie, I mean, the cost alone of managing all these plants is huge. So it's going to be a big thing for us to take on, but going at it from that site-led perspective is probably going to be the way forward, I would say.
Thank you, Kelsey. I have one question for you, Kelsey. If we were to run a pest plant field day next year, could the biodiversity team help with that? That we could invite volunteer groups and work crews that are working for iwi and all sorts of different people, landowners, to help identify key pest plants.
Yep, I would say so. We do also, so we have our biosecurity team, which is the team that I'm part of. So we're the plant killers. And we have our biodiversity team, and we do have a couple of community reps as well, and they're really active working with community groups. So we can probably get them involved as well, which would be really cool.
Yeah, I like to just have a positive, practical outcome from this hui, because I've had a few people say that it's great to have this communication channel open, and we'll try and keep it going. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, we've got Barry Scott has raised his hand. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Barry.
So, Kelsey, just following up from what you've said about the Phragmites, if we look back, it's been with us now 17 years in the Manawatu. What can we learn from this? I mean, how do we miss it? And, what should we be doing looking out? It seems we're just relying too much on lists, and there's lots of volunteer groups out and about making observations. And this seems to be one that's just totally slipped through the net.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think, to be fair, we need to give a lot of credit to Bessie for being, the voice behind this, and I admire her dedication to the cause. I think sometimes bureaucracy gets the better of situations such as this one. So I think, to be honest, being as vocal as it is actually, it is having an impact. So I would say that it's just about continuing that sort of thing and making sure that people are aware of it. Because the more people are aware of it, the more people are realising that this is a serious issue. And there is a lot of investment coming from the community. And I mean, as council workers, we respond to ratepayers, basically in a broad scheme, you're our boss. So at the end of the day, if we can try and help achieve what you guys are wanting to achieve, then that's where we need to go.
But you must have some discretion, though. You're not totally handbound to these regional plans, are you not?
Unfortunately, yeah, we are. And I mean, we have got the ability. So the pest management plan gets reviewed every 20 years, which is a very long time. But there is the ability for things to be changed under extenuating circumstances. In terms of that, that's well above, where I come into it. But if there are rules in place that if things do come in, they can add or take out of the pest management plan.
Are you sure it's 20 years? I thought within the Biosecurity Act it had to be done every 5 years.
I think the review is 10, but the actual plan itself is rewritten, I suppose, every 20. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the review's 10.
Bessie mentioned that it's very similar to Phragmites, the other one. Could they not be put together? And as that containment, whatever on that list?
Yeah, so Phragmites australis is in our exclusion. So that means that it's not in the region. So the Phragmites carca obviously wouldn't fit into that plan. So that's why I'm saying about that site-led, because it's here, it's about determining what's important to protect and targeting it from that site-led perspective as well.
The thing that can be done, though, is because it is so similar to Australis, there's a lot of research that's been done on Australis. So anything that's been found out about Australis is going to be the same for Kaka. So it's just a matter of looking at what they've done in the way of herbicide trials and all the rest of it. I'm fairly sure you'd find it would work the same on Kaka.
Bessa, you'll probably be able to answer that question better than I can.
We have actually found that there are some slight differences in the way it behaves, we think, and this is where we modelled all our R&D and what we were trialling on Australis internationally, but we've actually found some different subtleties there that I don't know what we're looking at, which is why we need more help in the R&D.
Yeah, we had a question just come up from Mary Legg. Is there any way we can support Bessie to get Phragmites kaka onto the national list? So you can give everyone an update on where that is, Bessie.
I haven't been successful anywhere on the national lists. There's these legislative issues that come right from the top, and Kelsey's actually referred to them. How you actually go through that process of getting a weed recognised is a minefield, and I haven't cracked yet the formula to go, this is what you do. So I've tried several avenues, and every time I've come back and said, it's out of my pay grade, out of my control. So we're just going round and round, spinning wheels. I don't know how we do it.
Did you tell me a while ago, though, that that it's going to be reviewed by Biosecurity New Zealand?
Biosecurity New Zealand, I wish Andrea she's just left. They have actually been looking at the issue with us, but we haven't got any definitive answers yet. I can't forecast what the problem is. And also Biosecurity New Zealand is more focused on external situations rather than internal. It's about what's coming into New Zealand. So they're kind of quite limited as to where they can step at the moment. So although they've been really supportive to us in trying to get something going, it's kind of not within their realm. And this is where the problem is. Who actually is it controlling the national listings and that sort of thing?
What you've got to look at, though, is what they're trying to do with all these different bodies. And what that national body is trying to do is for species that are hardly present within New Zealand to try and get rid of them or to try and stop them coming in. Kaka is so well established that it is beyond that. So then it comes down to regional councils as to what they want to do within their region as to whether they want to try and stamp it out. It's going through those different categories that Kelsey was talking about, whether they want to stamp them out or just do it on a site-led basis or just have good neighbour type stuff. So, but certainly what's been shown there, that it's only present in some areas, and it's a matter of whether the regional council wants to stop it getting throughout the country, the region, which I would have thought would be quite useful.
Thank you. I'm interested in these flowers that have been found. And as far as I knew, everyone thought Phragmites kaka didn't flower in New Zealand, but that Australis did. Is there any chance, given that they have the same genome, that we actually have some Australis in our region?
There is a possibility, but it's more likely to be a hybrid. And that is information that I don't think we will know. And like, we've just sent all the samples down to Christchurch, to the arboreum to be looked at, and they're going to look at the work on it. Because that's the first sample that they have actually had, so we've shoved it off there. I don't know what the outcome would be. If it's Australis, we as a country actually have a massive issue. If it's a hybrid between Australis and Kaka, I don't know where we sit. And if it comes back as Kaka, we're back into the same situation that Kerry has just pointed out. Hey, it's regional, get on with dealing with it, kind of. And then you're going round and round in circles as an area that is so compromised, and it's being compromised not just from within the area, but every time we get rains every winter, more comes back. So I don't know what the flower's significance is going to be yet.
Well, I can inform the group. If you let me know, I can send that out to them.
I will certainly let everybody know when we get any outcome back. It could be 3-4 weeks. I don't know how long it will take before we'll get information.
Right. Thank you so much, Bessie. I have a question from Maury, Daniel Morimer. Sorry. Is there a possibility of having a GIS system for recording and noting pest plant locations in our region that is viewable and updatable by qualified individuals from a range of different organisations? What does Horizons use at the moment? I think this is around, we've kind of had this discussion a little bit around, we need to have a central point for all sightings of Phragmites and different things to come to, and someone who's going to hold that database of information of where something has been seen. Kelsey, can you answer that?
Yeah, so I mean, you're 100% right. There is a lot of information lost, in particular between organisations. So there's 2 points to this. We use something called iNaturalist a lot, which is really great because members of the public can update information. They can load photos so we can go through and have a look at it. But it is difficult in that if someone lists something as a species and it's not actually that species, you're kind of having to filter through a whole lot of information to find what you really need. So Horizons, we have something, can I share my screen really quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
This one. So this is our weeds database. Our team actually has an app that we use to log all of the information about all of our weeds. So when it loads, obviously it's quite slow. So you see all of those dots on the screen, all of those red lines, orange lines, yellow lines, they're all sites that we're currently managing throughout the region. So we have a really in-depth database for our team itself, but in terms of across organisation, that is definitely something that that's lacking. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, could you send me the link to the right iNaturalist app for me to make sure I send out the right one with the
yep, yeah, no worries. Yep.
Yeah, so maybe we need to, now that this communication channel's open, maybe call a forum of key stakeholders to start talking about sharing of information and creating a central database for the region that everyone can see, just like Lawa and the water quality sites kind of thing. I think that would be quite neat going forward. We've got Stuart Herricks has got his hand up. Sorry, her hand up, sorry.
I think it's really interesting that running at the same time as this is a Zoom run by MPI, which is about the risks velocity concept, particularly in relation to the primary sector. Bessie, you'll find that interesting because this is 17 years. That's hardly velocity. Sounds like the slow train to me. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Part of my resource list I'm sending out is the latest Space Invaders report. If you haven't all read it before, it's a good read, bad read, about the state of the country in terms of pest plant control. From Nadine, from Mary Legg,
Yeah.
she had a question. Do I need a handless cert to use haloxyfop? Kerry?
I would have to check that, but no, I think anyone can use that. There were quite a few restrictions on what you can and what you could and couldn't use a few years ago, but they have just lightened up in the last 2 or 3 years. They realised that it wasn't necessary to have regulations over who can do what. Certainly things like paraquat, only a few people can use, but a lot of these other herbicides. And the other thing is you couldn't buy it. You couldn't actually go into the shop unless you had a grow safe certificate or something like that. But I'm fairly sure those restrictions have now gone for something like haloxyfop, which is a pretty innocuous type chemical. So.
Yeah, except it's restricted for its use around water.
Oh, yeah. No, obviously anything around water, there is a huge amount of legislation about that. And so you're not allowed to use any chemical around waterways unless you know what you're doing.
And what's the setback, Kerry? Is it 20 metres?
Yeah, I don't know my legislation well enough. Kelsey might know that.
To be honest with you, I don't really use haloxyfop. We have
No, it's just a matter of how far away you have to be from waterways before you can use chemicals.
The regional plan, it's about 10. In the regional plan, it's about 10 metres for aerial spraying around waterways. And 50.
We also have in our information that we've been given is actually 10 metres from the edge of the channel. Yeah,
which is can be frustrating when you're trying to set up a riparian planting.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to do your spray circles beforehand, so you may have to use other methods. I find just tramping down the grass around is a little bit more time consuming, but works well. Let's just have a look.
Looks like Jill's got a hand up.
Thank you, Kerry. Jill, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, I wanted to ask Kerry if there's been any advances on organic weed sprays, because none of them seem to kill the root. You spray them on the leaves, but but it would be absolutely fantastic. I'm on an organic farm, but in our forest, it would be a marvellous thing if we could use organic weed sprays that were successful.
Yeah, I mean, we'd spend many hours debating this. I feel that a number of the chemicals that are currently used are more innocuous than the organic chemicals. So just because something's called organic doesn't make it any better a chemical. But you're right, all they do is scorch. And so they don't go down to the root system. And so that's where you've got to use something like glyphosate or haloxyfop. And in which case the organic people deem those as synthetic chemicals and therefore not permissible to use. But I think it's just a matter of trying to work out what it is you're trying to do when you say you want to go organic. So if you're a registered food producer with organics, then that's one thing. But if you're just worried about chemicals, a lot of these chemicals have got very low toxicity, which is one of the things that Barry brought up in the chat as to how do you go about actually educating people about the fact that a lot of these chemicals that are being used are actually very safe. And there's a lot of, I mean, I've gone into the public arena a few times trying to say how safe glyphosate is and some of the others. It's very difficult to try and get complex the toxicological things across to the average layman. But so, yeah, as I say, it would take many hours to unpick all that.
Well, it's kind of off subject, just to let you know, we live next door to an organic dairy farm and our farm slopes down, and apparently they can pick up glyphosate in the hooves of the cows. Fonterra can. So that's why we've gone organic, because it's a neighbourly thing. We're not madly keen on not using sprays, but it's just a neighbourly thing.
Yeah, I'd find it very hard to believe that they can, unless the hooves had actually gone over an area that had been sprayed with glyphosate. It's not likely that it's just.
No, well, it's just apparently it seeps down. That's what I've been told anyway. It might not be true, but
I suspect it isn't. But anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Are there anyone else? Any other questions? anything for Angela Bounds around biocontrol? I had one question. I came into the breakout room and you were just through talking about how you use 2 different biocontrol agents on Tradescantia quite successfully.
Yeah, so for Tradescantia, we've actually got 4 agents, but one is a smut fungus. So it's a pathogenic, so it causes diseases on a disease on the leaves of the plant. And that was released in 2018, and which in biocontrol terms is not that long ago, but we've already seen really good success where the plants have died back, and we've got really nice photos of native forest plants regenerating as the Tradescantia is dying back. And it seems like as a lot of fungi do prefer sort of cool, wet conditions. So it's doing really well in those sorts of environments. And then we've also got 3 beetles that attack different parts of the plant. So one attacks the growing tips, and it's the larvae that are the damaging life stages. And then the larvae of another one are in the stems of the plant, so they damage the stems, and the other ones feed on the leaves. So together as a group, they're a nice feeding guild because they're attacking all the different plant parts. And those the beetles were released in 2012. They've taken a little bit longer to show impact, but in the North Island there are some sites as well where they're doing a significant amount of damage, where the populations of trade have declined, and we're getting native plant species coming back, and they tend to the prediction based on early findings is that they prefer sunnier regions, sunnier areas. So we're hoping that the pathogen and the insects together will have good coverage of all the areas where Tradescantia is a problem. But it's ongoing research. It's we can't monitor everything, but it is one of the projects where we've got quite intensive post-release studies, looking at the impact of the agents and then also how they interact together, if they are established at the same site, whether they're complementary or whether there's a little bit of interference between them. So it's the well-studied system, and is ongoing.
Are there any sites within the Manawatu that we could use as collection sites?
I'll have to find that out for you. I can put you onto the person to ask. Have you heard of Paul Peterson?
No.
He's at our Palmerston North office. He's and he's a field technician. And so it's at landcareresearch.co.nz, and it's Peterson, Peterson, P for Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And he should definitely be able to put you onto some sites, or I don't know, Kelsey, Kelsey might know if there are any, because the biosecurity officers are also good people to talk to locate sites where the agents are well established.
Yeah, we have. We've got a few running. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of luck in terms of having enough established to create our own nurseries. But we've actually been talking to Paul Peterson as well, and we're going to, because we have, I'm sure you can all appreciate, we have a very big list of people that are wanting this biocontrol. So we're trying to work through that list, and just getting in touch with Paul has been fantastic, because he's got a number of sites that we're going to be able to harvest from. But obviously we just want to be really careful and manage it properly, because if everyone starts to go in and take plants, well, there's going to be nothing left. So we need to make sure that it's all done properly as well.
Okay, so key contact will be get in touch with you guys and go on the list.
Yes, and be patient, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela.
Oh, Jill's going to hand up again.
Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, yes, it's just about the beetles. We've got some growing somewhere. I'm not sure where. We wanted to put them in the park because we've got a terrible Tradescantia problem. We've had to delay it because the local iwi weren't very happy. Our park is under treaty claim, but we're hoping they've decided that perhaps this September we will be releasing them. That's just to let you know. If you want to know where ours are coming from, please contact me or Bessie, and I'll find out for you. Thank you.
Excellent. I don't see any other hands raised. Do any of the panelists want to say anything else before we close for the session? All good. Great. Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I hope this is just the start of more talks and discussions around pest plants and finding out what people need. That's kind of what my role is figuring out what's needed and trying to make that happen. So feel free to get in touch with me around any of these topics, and I can help connect you with more resources and try and organise some events that will work well for everyone.